It was a very ordinary day, with very cool weather, which is common in this season. At about 3 o'clock in the morning, she could no longer sleep. He walked to the window and opened the curtains, and a fresh air came in. But she didn't feel as good as the weather. He felt a dull headache, and his temples were throbbing as if someone was pulling hard with a rope. He remembered the dream he had last night, the strange invisible staircase, and the shadows that walked with their legs lifted up. For many years, maybe 20 years, that dream and the shadows in the dream have always accompanied him. No matter what method he used, such as screaming or slapping himself hard, he couldn't break free from the nightmare. He had to watch the strange gate of the shadows over and over again with fear, and feel the thumping of his heartbeat very clearly. But yesterday's dream was a little different. She saw something else. Of course, it must have come from what he witnessed that year. Maybe due to extreme fear and the fact that he only had a glimpse of it at the time. He couldn't remember such a thing for so many years. It was only in last night's dream that he saw it again. Just like hypnosis can awaken people's lost memories. When he saw it again in his dream, he almost screamed out loud. He immediately thought that this forgotten thing might be the only clue to the whole incident. It was an emblem, like a mark on a t-shirt, printed on a shadow that had appeared before. The emblem looked black, and the content was a string of Chinese characters with calligraphy. Maple Leaf Knife City. This is undoubtedly a place name, but she couldn't remember any place with this name. He turned on his computer and searched for all Chinese-speaking regions in a few minutes. She couldn't help but feel nervous while doing all this. For many years, because of that incident, she was not a very healthy person in the eyes of his family, although they did not dislike him for it. She always thought that he was normal, but he himself did not understand why only he could see those shadows. For understandable reasons, his family was very careful to keep this secret, but there were still some rumors floating from one block to another. When she walked on the street, he would really feel some fingers crawling on his back. Whenever this happened, she would feel inexplicably sad in his heart, and he would even turn his head suddenly and shout loudly, "They are there, but you just don't see them." Generally speaking, his action would either be exchanged for silence or ridicule. Of course, there is also Chin, the girl with big eyes and wide bangs. When thinking of this name, she felt a pang of pain in his heart. She left, she thought. She said she didn't care about his strange imagination but couldn't ignore the gazes of others. She said so. The weather that day was very good, and the autumn leaves were flying in the sky. It was really a day for parting. A yellow leaf stained on Chin's purple sweater, which looked like a specially made decoration. Her back as she turned and left was so beautiful that it was unforgettable. The search was over, but the result was disappointing. The computer showed that the place name did not exist. Not only did there not exist a Maple Leaf City, but even a city with a similar name did not exist. She lit a cigarette and smoked it very quickly. He didn't understand what was going on. That city should exist. He clearly saw its name. It must be somewhere in the world. Due to a mirage or some other very ordinary reason, she saw the people living in this city. It must be, she thought fiercely. I am normal as others. I will prove it to everyone. But where is that city, that Maple Leaf City? After dawn, she did not go to work. He started writing a letter on the computer, asking everyone who received the letter for any clues about Maple Leaf City, and hoping that they could send the letter to other people they knew. At the same time, she also posted inquiry information on multiple electronic bulletin boards. After doing these things, she felt relieved, and he firmly believed that he could achieve his goal. She had imagined the various consequences that the letter would cause, but he never thought that the letter would actually attract the police. The next afternoon after the letter was sent, 20 policemen armed to the teeth rushed into Hishi's office and took him away on suspicion of endangering public safety. When the black cloth covering Hishi's eyes was removed, he found himself in a completely unfamiliar environment. This was a large room, decorated luxuriously, but also with great taste. When Hishi was about to take a closer look, the door suddenly opened. The visitor was a man in his early 40s, wearing fine clothes, and his eyes revealed the extraordinary demeanor that only people of high status have. He gave people a feeling of superiority. "Good afternoon, Mr. Hishi." The visitor nodded politely. I am Dr. Hao Nansuan. I invited you here. You have something to talk to me about? She asked carefully. It's a message for you. I saw it on a bulletin board on the internet. Hao Nansuan's narrowed eyes looked like two sharp knives. You were looking for a city. She became more excited and even forgot his current situation. Do you have any clues about that place? Why don't you tell me why you wanted to find this place? The desire for the truth overwhelmed everything, and she explained the whole thing in detail. When he was excited, he even talked about the girl who left him. He really wanted to know why all this happened. Since childhood, Hao Nansuan murmured, you are the only one who can see those images. Those images have never disappeared. They have always been there, but no one can see them. She was lost in thought as he spoke. I feel as if they live there, in the city called Maple Leaf Knife. Really? Heian smiled, but there is no such city. She didn't expect the other party to say this. This is not true. There must be such a place. That's just your idea. Hao Nansuan shook his head. There is no such city in the world. If you don't believe me, you can travel around the world to verify it. Your weird idea is an illusion. I forgot to tell you that this is a hospital that treats patients with mental disorders. However, we are willing to pay for your treatment. You mean? She took a breath. I'm a patient, and the condition is quite serious. Hao Nansuan nodded. You need treatment immediately. We have already informed your family. They are very happy to hear that someone is willing to pay for your treatment, and they also think it is necessary. Here, Hao Nansuan shook the paper in his hand. This is the signature of your family. Hao Nansuan pressed the button on the table, and a few seconds later 4 sturdy men in white coats came in. Take him to the 3rd ward. He is a critically ill patient. Hao Nansuan pointed at she and said. She looked at all this. He simply didn't know what was going on. He had become a mental patient in the blink of an eye. He felt like he was dreaming. It was not until the 4 men came over and grabbed his arms and walked outside that he woke up and shouted, I'm not sick. I can really see those shadows. They are going up the stairs. They live there, in Maple Leaf City. I'm not sick. But the more she said this, the tighter the 4 men's hands clenched. Several other doctors in the corridor looked at this scene, looking unperturbed. Hao Nansuan smiled and shrugged his shoulders, making a helpless gesture. Then he turned back and closed the door. Almost at the same time, the smile on his face disappeared, replaced by a gloomy look. Makino Jing was in a panic when she went out. She almost ran all the way to the underground parking lot. After getting into the car, she immediately dialed the video phone. On the screen, Director Owen's face was very nervous. Number 148, Block 36, Counselor Walsh's residence. Got it. Makino Shizuka repeated Owen's words loudly. I'll go there right away. Is there anyone else? You are in charge of this case for now. Owen emphasized, based on preliminary information, this case may be related to Free Haven. Makino Jing was shocked. Free Haven, a mysterious organization that has recently emerged. Unlike some other organizations, this organization is like an ally of the police, because it only does one thing, that is, to eradicate other terrorist organizations. In less than a year, it has successively overthrown no less than 10 terrorist organizations that the police have been helpless against, but no one knows what methods it uses. In short, the police had a very good time in this year, and good news came every day. But this situation did not last forever. The police soon discovered that the power of this mysterious organization was growing, and those overthrown organizations were actually swallowed up by it. Its subsequent actions made the police realize that a truly terrible opponent had appeared. It should be said that these are just speculations by the police, because there is no evidence to prove that this organization is related to the recent terrorist incidents. People just found that anyone or any organization that opposes Free Haven will be attacked inexplicably in the end. On a rainy night 2 months ago, Counselor Liu Hanwei, who advocated a tougher attitude towards all illegal organizations, suddenly died at home. A month ago, another counselor who held the same view as Liu Hanwei also died suddenly on the street. And now it is Counselor Hua Jishi's turn. What about the cases I was originally responsible for? Asked Shizuka Makino, especially the one I care about the most. Owen frowned. You mean the rumor about the avalanche in the Sahara Desert? Makino Jing couldn't help but interject. I don't think that's a rumor. I believe what the locals say. They don't seem to be making up stories. I've spent nearly a year investigating this matter, and I don't want to stop halfway now. Owen smiled faintly. Is there any story more bizarre than an avalanche in a tropical desert? But I was there. I saw with my own eyes that there were large areas of water stains in the desert, and it was so cold that it made people shiver. This must have been caused by the melting of ice and snow. Makino Shizuka almost shouted. The avalanche also crushed 2 local people to death. Owen frowned and said, I don't want to argue with you. Let me tell you, you can either investigate this matter or continue investigating the avalanche. Makino Shizuka closed her mouth sensibly, revealing a helpless expression. After a while, she nodded and said, well, avalanches will be my hobby from now on. I'm going to Block 36 now. Block 36 is a beautiful residential area where many successful people live. The entire block is shrouded in the shadows of green trees, making it quiet and comfortable. Please let me in. Makino Jing held up her ID and squeezed in. At this time, a sturdy policeman came over and checked her ID very responsibly. He looked at Makino Jing's face hesitantly and said, okay, you can come in, but it may be dangerous inside. What danger? Asked Makino Jing. We received a call from MP Wajith's family saying that MP Wajith had been kidnapped, so we rushed here immediately. We are now trying to negotiate with the other party. Who did it? I don't know. The police officer pointed to a door not far away and said, that's the bathroom. Counselor Walsh is inside. We have blocked all exits. Makino Jing walked towards the door. Several police officers were pointing their guns at the door and shouting loudly. Lights could be seen flickering through the crack in the door, indicating that there was movement inside. At the same time, some dull noises could be heard from the door from time to time, as if someone was struggling. You are surrounded. A tall police officer shouted over and over again, put down your weapons and surrender immediately. Suddenly, there was a loud noise from the door, and then there was no movement. Makino Shizuka secretly cried out in her heart, oh no! Almost at the same time, the police officers immediately took action. They fired their guns to break the lock and rushed in, but immediately stood still on the spot. Shizuka Makino followed closely, and she immediately understood why the police officers were so dumbfounded. Because there was only Councilman Walsh in the bathroom. The windows were closed, and in fact, no one could escape from there even if the windows were opened because there were steel bars on the windows. Councilman Walsh was lying face up in a pool of blood, wearing pajamas, and a strange-looking knife pierced his right chest. Shizuka Makino looked at Councilman Walsh's injuries calmly, then shook her head. It was obvious that his injuries were incurable. At this moment, Councilman Walsh's lips suddenly moved, and Shizuka Makino quickly lowered her head to listen to his last words clearly. That man went over there, Hua Jishir said as he glanced at the bathroom. Makino Shizuka knew that this was the route the man took when he left. But Hua Jishir's gaze tilted upwards towards the bathroom and finally stopped at the upper left corner of the ceiling. Hua Jishir's gaze gradually became blurred. He walked up there, lifting his legs one by one. And then? Makino Jing asked loudly. She felt that she could not stop sweating. And then, bloody foam came out of Counselor Vargas' mouth, and then it disappeared. He lowered his head suddenly, and his voice stopped abruptly. 2074, come get the medicine. The plump Miss Green shouted in a loud voice, pushing a small cart full of medicine. The man lying on the bed immediately jumped up reflexively, stretched out his skinny hand like a chicken claw, and took the small bag in Miss Green's hand. Green nodded with satisfaction. In her impression, 2074 had made relatively fast progress. When he first came, he not only refused to take medicine, but also treated every medical staff member like an enemy. It took several strong men to feed him medicine for the first time. Take the medicine, Green said softly. In fact, Green didn't know what kind of medicine 2074 took. It seemed that they were all strange pills that he had never seen before. 2074 poured the pill into his mouth and took the water cup from Green. He swallowed the pill and pointed to his abdomen with a flattering expression and smiled at Miss Green. I ate it, he said. It's all here. Miss Green felt a wave of tenderness in her heart. In comparison, 2074 was a relatively easy patient to take care of. In layman's terms, He was a literary lunatic. Generally speaking, patients like this lived in a group ward, but 2074 lived alone and was forbidden to talk to other patients. Be good. Green patted 2074's hand and said, just eat it. 2074 blushed after receiving the praise and lowered his head with a shy look. A strand of saliva flowed from the corner of his mouth onto the quilt, mixing with the original stains. He was obviously interested in the bright line drawn by the saliva and reached out to hold the hanging slime, pulling it and playing with it, his eyes smiling madly. Miss Green saw 2074 muttering something while playing. She listened carefully for a few seconds, and it seemed to be a word. Stairs. There's a staircase. Miss Green sighed. Stairs, stairs again. She had been telling everyone there was a staircase since 2074 was admitted. Miss Green stood up and pushed the cart to go out to the next room. Suddenly, a man rushed in with a piece of paper. He walked and shouted loudly, "He, she." Who is he, she? Green stopped the man and asked, Dr. Murray, who are you looking for? The visitor did not answer. His eyes searched around. Then he shouted as if he had made a great discovery, 2074. Yes, it's you. He rushed to the bed and said to the man who was playing with his saliva, Congratulations, sir. Your illness is completely cured and you can be discharged from the hospital. Come, sign your name. She looked at the man who suddenly broke in with a blank look on his face and hid behind Miss Green in fear. I took it. He pointed to his abdomen with a flattering smile and said, I took the medicine. Marue impatiently stuffed a pin into Hishi's hand. You have recovered from your illness. It's time to be discharged. He frowned in disgust. I knew that free treatment would only breed lazy people like you. You have good food and drink and people to serve you. You have had a good life for more than a year. Don't play dumb. The test report is the most fair. She looked at the pin in her hand and the man with a loud voice in front of her at a loss, as if she was about to cry. After a while, he suddenly turned the tip of the pin around and put it in his mouth. This is not medicine. Miss Green hurriedly stopped Hishi. She turned to Marue and said, Are you mistaken? Although I am just a nurse, I have been responsible for taking care of this patient. I am sure that it is not time for him to be discharged from the hospital yet. I don't care about that. Marue said in a businesslike manner, Anyway, the higher-ups have arranged for this patient to be discharged. If the patient pays for his own treatment, he can stay as long as he wants, but this is free treatment. Now that the higher-ups have discharged him, they won't allocate money to him in the future. What do you want me to do? But his illness is really not cured. Green looked at Hishi. He will be a waste if he goes out like this. That's not something I can do. Just clean him up. The patient's family is waiting outside. They will naturally take care of him from now on. It has nothing to do with us. Miss Green had nothing more to say. Marue was right. This was not something she could do. Green put Hishi's hand into Marue's and said, You go with him. Hishi was afraid and wanted to break free from Marue's hand. But Miss Green stopped him with a stern look. A moment later, Miss Green was the only one left in the small ward. She lowered her head to tidy up the bed, but she couldn't calm down. Gone. The patient. Green thought in a trance, he is still a patient. Anyone can see it at a glance. But we actually let a patient who has not recovered at all be discharged from the hospital. Who can tell me what is going on? Makino Jing entered the conference room. She felt a huge pressure. There were less than 10 people sitting in this room that could accommodate 100 people, but each of them was a person that could not be easily faced. This time, she was ordered to report the assassination of Congressman Hua Jisher to the senior officials who came specially from the Interpol headquarters. Makino Jing noticed that her audience was very serious. Most of them were her colleagues, but the badges on each of their shoulders made her dare not breathe. There were also a few elderly people in plain clothes whose identities could not be seen, but from the attitude of the others towards them, it seemed that their status was extremely respected. Facing them, Makino Jing had a strange feeling in her heart. How to say it? Their gestures had a kind of majesty that could not be ignored, just like Pharaoh. Pharaoh? Makino Jing was stunned for a moment, for the word that suddenly popped up in her mind. Wait a minute. At this time, an old man with white hair interrupted Makino Jing's speech. I am Dr. Jiang Zhixin. I want to ask, did the congressman named Hua Jisher really say that? Was he sober at the time? Makino Jing nodded. He did say that. As for whether he was awake or not, it's hard for me to tell. From my feeling, I think his words are credible, because at that time he was trying his best to tell me those words. I think he was holding on to not die immediately just to say those words. Several elderly people in the conference room exchanged glances and seemed to accept what Jing Makino said, but the expressions on their faces became more solemn. Another kind-looking old man said, I am Dr. Choi Yuen, and I want to know whether Counselor Walter mentioned the gender of that person. Makino thought for a moment. I remember he said it was a man. It seems that a strange person has appeared. Dr. Jiang Zhixin whispered to the people next to him, the odds are terrible. We are in big trouble. Makino Jing looked at the group of people discussing seriously in confusion. She didn't understand what was going on, but she could feel intuitively that this was something very serious. She held back for a moment but still asked, Can you tell me what's going on? Who were discussing stopped and looked at Makino Jing. After a while, Dr. Jiang Zhixin said, I'm sorry, this matter involves high-level government secrets, and we can't explain it to you. Makino Jing had nothing more to say. The level of everyone here could make her shut up. She glanced around and then tactfully left the meeting room. However, some low whispers still entered her ears. Where is the person from before now? A hoarse voice asked. Let me check. In this city. Number 61, Block 47. Can you contact him? I'm afraid it doesn't make any sense. Why? Because the 5-member committee had already handled the case as instructed. Makino Shizuka only heard this because the door to the meeting room was closed when she left. But these few words had left a big knot in her heart. She returned to the office and wanted to sort out the recent progress of the case. But the phone rang, and she picked up the receiver. It was Director Owen calling. What? Makino Shizuka yelled. You want me to hand over this case? I can't hand it over when there's no clue at all. We are no longer responsible for this case. The higher-ups have made other arrangements. Please organize the files and prepare for transfer. Makino Jing put down the phone, bit her lower lip and stood there in a daze for a long time. I took over this case first. I can't just hand it over like this. Makino Jing suddenly said, and she was also shocked. But her determination was made at this moment. It took Jing Makino several hours to find the location of number 61, Block 47. It was an old courtyard that was about to be demolished. Jing Makino heard that there was a man named Hishi who suffered from mental illness. An unknown person had paid for his treatment but failed to cure him. Jing Makino immediately felt intuitively that this was the person he was looking for. Makino Jing pushed open the unlocked door and walked into the yard. A bearded man sat by the wall on the left side of the yard. He was basking in the sun with his eyes half closed. A strand of shiny saliva ran from the corner of his mouth to his collar, which had obviously not been washed for a long time, wetting a dark spot there. There were some scattered cardboards on the ground in front of him, and next to them was a half bucket of glue and some pasted paper boxes. At this time, an old woman suddenly came out from a nearby room and punched the dozing man on the shoulder. You dead thing, you only know how to eat and sleep, and you know how to be lazy after doing a little work. The old woman was filled with sorrow as she spoke, and she rubbed her nose hard with red eyes. You are over 30 years old, but you are like a waste. I don't know what sins you committed in your previous life, and God wants you to torture me. The man woke up from his sleep and looked at the old woman's waving hands nervously. Once her hands got close to his body, he would scream in fear. After a while, he was sure that the old woman might not hit him again. So he hurriedly picked up the tools on the ground and started to paste the paper box, but his eyes were always fixed on the old woman's hands, and he did not dare to relax. Excuse me, Mu Yejing asked softly, is there a person named Hishi here? The old woman looked at Makino Jing with a puzzled expression. What do you want to see him about? My Jing paused. She actually didn't know what she could do after finding Hishi. Hishi. The old woman kept repeating the name, as if she was chewing something from a long time ago. Something soft emerged in her eyes, and her gaze was cast on the man she called dead thing, Hishi. She called softly, then turned to look at Mu Yejing and said, He is Hishi. He is my son. He was originally very good. At most he just had some minor problems. The old woman rubbed her eyes sadly. but now he has become like this. There was a noise outside the courtyard, as if a large group of people were walking towards this side. "This is it," someone shouted loudly. After a while, the door of the courtyard was pushed open, and no less than 20 people rushed in. Makino Jing was surprised to find that she actually recognized some of these people, such as Dr. Jiang Zhixin and several senior officials of Interpol headquarters. Some of the others were actually soldiers with live ammunition. "Why are you here?" Dr. Jiang Zhixin looked at Makino Jing in surprise. "What do you know?" Dr. Jiang Zhixin blurted out, but he immediately realized that asking this question would make things complicated. "I mean, what are you doing here?" Makino's mind moved. She had a hunch that this matter might be related to the Free Paradise case. "I was just chatting with He-Shi." "Chatting?" Dr. Jiang Zhixin looked at Makino Jing's face suspiciously. "Then I have to interrupt you. I have to take this person away now." Makino Jing was nervously thinking. "We were just talking about the key point. This matter may be related to Free Paradise." Dr. Jiang Zhixin was stunned for a moment, looking somewhat helpless. "Well, it seems we have to take you with us." He made a gesture, and then the fully armed soldiers gathered around. The old woman standing nearby realized what was happening at this time. She stood in front of her son and said, "You can't take him away." The soldiers looked back at Jiang Zhixin at a loss, waiting for his order. Dr. Jiang Zhixin lowered his voice and said, "We just took him for treatment." The old woman looked at the soldiers warily, with disbelief in her eyes. Her attitude affected He-Shi, and he stood up and looked at everyone with distrust. Only then did Mu Yejing realize that He-Shi was quite tall, and it would be a lot of trouble to take him away by force. Dr. Jiang Zhixin thought for a moment, then turned around and took out the intercom and whispered something. 10 minutes later, a plump woman came in from the door, and her eyes were immediately fixed on the man who was still pasting paper boxes. 2074, she said. He-Shi was stunned for a moment, then showed a flattering smile and spread his hands. "This is the most beautiful ward Miss Green has ever seen. It is over 500 square meters in area, fully equipped with all necessary facilities, and there is only one patient in the whole ward. He-Shi is taking medicine. The variety and color are quite complicated. He is becoming more and more irritable, and sometimes he is silent and dazed for a long time, as if thinking about something. The current He-Shi is completely different from a month ago. If Miss Green had not been with him all the time, she would definitely not recognize that this handsome man with a frown and deep eyes is actually the idiot back then. Today, He-Shi did not rest immediately after taking the medicine as usual, but lit a cigarette. After a while, he said to the air in front of him as if he had made up his mind, "Call them." "You mean?" Dr. Jiang Zhixin wiped the sweat from his forehead. He and He-Shi were the only two people in the room. "You remembered everything." The old man in front of him coldly, "Yes, I remember how you arrested me and declared me a lunatic." His voice gradually became lower. "Of course, I did become a lunatic and an idiot later." Dr. Jiang Zhixin sat down in silence, his legs a little weak. "I know this hurts you, but you have to help us now." "Help you?" He-Shi interrupted him. "Why should I help you?" He shouted, "You ruined me. You turned me into a waste. My God." Tears overflowed from He-Shi's eyelids. "And now you want me to help you?" Jiang Zhixin smiled awkwardly. "I can only say sorry. I know nothing can make up for your loss, but you really have to help us." He-Shi calmed down a little. "Let's put it this way. If you can give a legitimate reason for what you did to me, I will consider this issue. This matter is not something I can decide on my own, and this place is not safe. Unless the 5-man committee agrees collectively, I cannot tell you the truth." "Okay, I'll go with you." He-Shi nodded. "One more thing. I hope to meet the female police officer who found me a few minutes earlier than you that day." "Why?" He-Shi sighed. "Because I really don't want such a beautiful girl to become an idiot." 5-member committee is a mysterious organization. Its members are 5 famous experts ranging in age from 40 to over 80. It is a lifelong system. If a member dies, the other members will nominate a new member. No one knows what this organization does, and no one has heard of which department this committee belongs to. He-Shi had been unwilling to enter the secret room until he saw Mu Yejing brought by Jiang Zhixin. The door of the secret room slowly closed behind them, and there were only 7 people in the room: He-Shi, Mu Yejing, and the 5-member committee. He-Shi knew 2 of these people, Jiang Zhixin and Hao Nansuan. When Hishi's eyes fell on Hao Nansuan's face, they did not move for a long time, causing Hao Nansuan to look around uncomfortably. I know how you feel, Jiang Zhixin said to Hishi in an admonishing tone. Dr. Hao Nansuan was just doing his job back then. There were some things we had no choice but to do. At this time, an old lady with silver curly hair sitting on the left said, Mr. Hishi, I am Dr. Catherine from the 5-member committee. She pointed to the 2 tall and thin men in black suits sitting next to her and said, These are Dr. Lan Jiangshui and Dr. Chuizio. You may not believe it, but for safety reasons, the 5 of us have never appeared in the same place at the same time like today. Now I will answer your questions. Of course, you can also ask questions to other committee members if you want. Said without thinking, I want to know where Maple Leaf City is. Anyone can answer it. Here, he pointed at Lan Jiangshui and said, It's you. Lan Jiangshui did not answer immediately, but asked in return, I want to ask if you know about the new Blue Star immigration. She thought for a moment and said, That seems to have happened about 150 years ago. At that time, humans had discovered many planets in the universe that were suitable for life. So they chose one that was similar to the Earth, had many people frozen, and set out to migrate to that new planet. I remember that the planet was 40 light years away from the Earth. Based on the speed of the Photon spacecraft, the first group of people on the journey had already arrived a long time ago. Dr. Lan Jiangshui shook his head and smiled bitterly. I have to admire the government's superb confidentiality. After so many years, people still don't suspect anything. God knows where we got the Photon spacecraft from. And even if there is a new blue planet, who can guarantee that it has not been occupied by other creatures? Are they preparing to start a star war? Hishi stopped talking immediately. What are you talking about? You are not telling me that it was just a scam. This is a great event that has gone down in history. Catherine interrupted. If it was a hoax, it was not out of malice. It was just a means. The government spent a lot of effort to portray a certain wild planet as a new continent full of vitality in order to attract people to voluntarily immigrate. To be honest, the Earth was indeed quite bad at the time. More than 20 billion people lived on a planet that was only suitable for 10 billion people at most. If this is a scam, then where did all those people go? Hishi took a breath. Could it be? Dr. Jiang Zhixin waved his hand and said, Although the new Blue Star immigration plan is a scam, it's not that scary. As for those people, he cast his eyes on the dark yellow corner of the map. They live in a city similar to Maple Leaf City. It's no different from the city we live in. Maple Leaf City. Hishi muttered the name. This city had been inextricably linked to him and even changed his life. But he knew nothing about this place. They live in many cities like Maple Leaf City. Lan Jiangshui's tone was as if he was reading something. They breathe the same air, have the same metabolism, are born and die in the same way. They are no different from us. Except for one thing. Lan Jiangshui looked directly at Hishi's face, not missing any of his emotional changes. The bricks that make up their world are different from ours. Hishi felt that the more he listened, the more confused he became. He interrupted Lan Jiangshui and said, You still haven't told me where Maple Leaf City is. Dr. Catherine smiled and said, Let me tell you. Maple Leaf City is a medium-sized city on the coast with a population of about 900,000, most of whom are Chinese. Hishi added, somewhat annoyed, I didn't ask that. I asked about its geographical location. Catherine's expression became serious. It is approximately 105 degrees east longitude and 30 degrees north latitude. Wait. Hishi interrupted her, his eyes looking at the map on the wall. This is impossible. That place is inland, and, he took a breath, it's near my hometown. No. Catherine said stubbornly, Maple Leaf City is located at the southern end of the Maple Leaf Peninsula, facing Maple Leaf Bay. Hishi looked at Dr. Catherine's lips opening and closing with a dizzy look, and said weakly, Either you are crazy or I am crazy. You are all normal. It was Hao Nansuan's voice. Dr. Catherine said that it is the seaside, which is right. You said it is inland hills, which is also correct. You can even say that it is a snow mountain or a basin with negative altitude. This is all correct. What did you say? Hishi held his forehead. He could not tell that Hao Nansuan was joking. Do you know what you were talking about? Mu Yejing was also surprised. Of course I know what I am talking about. Hao Nansuan nodded without hesitation. As long as you listen to the reasons, you will understand why I said this. Do you know what Planck's constant is? Dr. Catherine asked softly. Searched in his mind. I learned it before. It's probably a constant. The energy of all objects is an integer multiple of it. Catherine nodded. You are not far-fetched. It is indeed a constant, and its specific value is 6.626 times 10 to the negative 34th power in joules per second. According to the basic view of quantum mechanics, the world does not exist continuously, but exists intermittently with this value. The energy and mass of all matter in this world, you should know that according to the mass-energy equation, these two are actually the same thing, are integer multiples of this value. If we regard this constant as the integer one, then the energy value of any object in this world is a very large integer. For example, it can be 15,000 or 940,076. These are all fine, but no object will have an energy value such as 8.54. In this sense, we might as well regard Planck's constant as the most basic brick, and the whole world is made up of countless such bricks. She listened very seriously, his mouth slightly parted, looking a little silly. It should be said that Catherine's explanation was very clear, but she didn't understand why she said this. She couldn't see how these profound theories had anything to do with himself. Wait. She finally couldn't help but interrupt Dr. Catherine. I just want to know where Maple Blade City is. You don't have to beat around the bush. I'm not interested in irrelevant things. Dr. Catherine sighed. I said all this just to tell you where Maple Blade City is. She looked around at the other members, as if making a final confirmation. Maple Blade City is indeed located where I said. This is impossible. She and Makino Jing shouted almost at the same time. This is true. Dr. Jiang Zhixin replied affirmatively. You mean it's a city built underground? You built another city underground, and even created an underground ocean. She asked hesitantly. Perhaps even he himself felt that this speculation was too absurd. His voice was very low. Catherine shook her head. You should have figured it out after all I've said. I can see that you're very smart. She's heart shuddered. Catherine's words reminded him of something. Yes, there was another possibility. But that was really too crazy. Impossible. She murmured, sweat beading on his forehead. Catherine's expression became a little gloomy, and her mind seemed to have flown far away. Her silver-white hair fluttered on her forehead. Her eyes stopped at a corner of the map, which was a dark yellow. Maple Leaf City is right there, a very ordinary city. But, Catherine paused. It's made of a different kind of brick. The basic principles of quantum mechanics give us a strong hint that we do not fill up all the space as we usually think. In fact, even if there is no gap in this planet, it is still extremely empty, because there are countless values in the gap of Planck's constant, just like there are countless decimals between 1 and 2. Dr. Catherine smiled mysteriously. Do you understand what I mean? In the world where Maple Leaf Blade City is located, Planck's constant has another starting point. If our Planck's constant is regarded as an integer of 1, the starting point of Planck's constant in Maple Leaf Blade City is approximately 1.16. Jiang Zhixin spoke with difficulty, and it was obvious that he took a lot of effort to say each word. This is the answer. Another value. She was still confused. What does this mean? You might as well imagine what would happen if a team of odd numbers and a team of even numbers met. Jiang Zhixin looked at Hishi's expression as if to inspire him. You should think that nothing will actually happen, because they will pass through each other's team without noticing. And the relationship between us and Maple Leaf Blade City is exactly the same. If you meet someone living in Maple Leaf Blade City, Jiang Zhixin paused. What do you think will happen? Hishi looked a little dumbfounded. What happened? He thought hard. Will I see a lot of small holes on his body? Dr. Jiang Zhixin slowly shook his head. The answer is that you can't sense him at all. He is just a void in front of you. But he will always reflect the light. Hishi interrupted. The problem is that all matter in his world has the same Planck constant offset as him, and light is no exception. All objects in that world, including light, can pass through your body without hindrance. To them, you are just a void. The relationship between you is like parallel lines in mathematics, extending forever but never intersecting. You mean to tell me that there are other strange things living around my body? Hishi nervously stretched out his hands and scratched the air. They can pass through my body at will, as if I don't exist. Sweat oozed from Hishi's forehead, and he held the wall dejectedly to prevent himself from falling. Mu Yejing's situation was not much better than his. Hishi sighed. Okay, I believe you. Although it is difficult for me to accept all this rationally. He turned his head and looked around at the other people in the room. I think you spent so much time telling me this not to broaden my horizons. To be honest, what do you want me to do? Dr. Jiang Zhixin did not answer the question directly, but continued to talk on his own. There is something else I want to tell you. Remember Dr. Hao Nansuan said that there are mountains and basins where Maple Leaf City is located? He paused. Do you understand what I mean? Hishi thought for a moment. Could it be that there is another world? In the turbulent times more than 200 years ago, our planet was already overwhelmed by population problems and overexploitation of nature. Jiang Zhixin's tone became heavy. I don't know how you view those of us who make science our profession, but I think most of us are slaves to our conscience. When we witness the suffering of mankind, we always feel extremely uneasy in our hearts, even if this situation is simply our own fault. At this time, one of our great colleagues appeared. He was a Chinese physicist named Jin Shi. Dr. Jin Shi found a method he called illegal transition, which can transition matter to another energy level that was originally impossible. A total of 6 possible stable solutions were found in his equation, and our original world is just one of them. What about the other 5 solutions? Hishi interrupted. The world at that time could no longer bear the burden of humanity. Dr. Jin Shi's only choice was to use all the solutions immediately. The government fully supported this plan. The world where Maple Leaf City is located is just one of the solutions. In a sense, our current world is actually composed of 6 worlds. 6th level, Hishi murmured, seeming to be touched. It's a bit of a coincidence indeed. Jiang Zhixin seemed to see through Hishi's thoughts. Back then, the Buddha divided the world of desire into 6 realms, including Hek, hungry ghosts, animals, asuras, humans, and heaven. They are endlessly reincarnated under the retribution of karma. He paused for a moment, and his tone became like a verdict. These are the so-called 6 realms of sentient beings. The Zongshemen National Laboratory is located on an isolated island in the South Pacific. From the outside, it is just an ordinary tropical island, but the fishermen nearby know that it is not allowed to approach here casually. And every day, some mysterious ships and helicopters with uncertain whereabouts fly from the island to the outside world. We haven't activated the Gate of All Beings for a long time. Jiang Zhixin walked behind Hishi, his thoughts obviously flying to the past. My predecessors set up this device to send the excess population at that time to 5 other newly created worlds. Its principle is not complicated. You should know that if an electron absorbs a photon, it will jump to a new energy level orbit. In the Gate of All Beings, there is a kind of particle with a special energy level that will radiate your body. Its energy level is less than 1/10 of Planck's constant, and this energy level does not exist in nature. By controlling its intensity, we can allow you to reach the other 5 newly created worlds. Okay, I have things to do. After speaking, Jiang Zhixin hurriedly walked towards the busy crowd. Makino Jing looked at Jiang Zhixin's background thoughtfully. I think something is wrong. What did you say? Hishi was surprised. Makino Jing carefully looked around and lowered her voice. Don't you think there are some things here that cannot be explained? Explain? Explain what? You know I'm a police officer, and I got involved in this matter because of the investigation of the Free Haven case. Makino Shizuka said seriously, if you think about these things in connection with that case. Hishi was stunned for a moment. He learned the details of the case from Mu Yejing. When he heard the scene described by Counselor Hua Jisher before his death, he naturally thought of the strange things he had witnessed before, but he did not understand anything from it. Now that Mu Yejing suddenly mentioned this, he was moved. I have an even bolder idea, said Shizuka Makino excitedly. About a year ago, I investigated a bizarre avalanche in the Sahara Desert. Think about it, is there a connection here? You're not saying. Hishi hesitated. He thought this idea was too absurd. Makino Jing nodded and said, maybe that's the truth. I haven't said it yet. How do you know what I said? Hishi couldn't help laughing. This is what they call even though we don't have the wings to fly like a phoenix, our hearts are connected with each other. My Jing laughed proudly. From Hishi's point of view, her smug smile was really touching. Hey, She suddenly cried softly, and her cheeks flushed. "What's the matter?" she asked, but he knew what was going on immediately because he remembered another possible meaning contained in Mu Yejing's words just now. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. "Don't worry about it. If I said something wrong, I said something wrong. We are fine." As soon as he said this, he knew he was wrong again. In such a situation, he could only pretend to be confused. How could he deliberately pretend to understand it? Who said it was wrong? As expected, Mu Yejing rolled her eyes at he and said, "Why are you meddling in other people's business? Let's get down to business." He changed the subject. "If we consider the avalanche as matter from another world that suddenly entered our world for some reason, then it would be easy to explain. Similarly, if we interpret that person's sudden disappearance as entering another world, then it wouldn't be strange." He's eyes were shining. But that person didn't rely on any device like the gate of all beings. Could it be that she's face changed a little? He can travel freely between the 6 worlds? Makino Jing's voice trembled a little, and this person is actually a murderer. He was very calm. He repeated what Mu Yejing said. He felt that all this was simply maddening. Yes, he is a murderer. He comes and goes without a trace. He is a free murderer who controls the power of life and death of all sentient beings in the 6 realms. Dr. Jiang Zhixin sat down dejectedly and spoke after a long time. "You finally thought of it." "Yes, this is our current situation. When we heard about the case of Free Paradise, we knew what happened, because there was no other explanation. The 5-man committee was originally an organization that manages overlapping spaces." Jiang Zhixin noticed the confusion of his audience. Overlapping space refers to the 6 layers of space, including our world. The 5-man committee was established more than 200 years ago, when the world had just been divided into 6 parallel material spaces by the great power of human wisdom, and then it took decades to make the other 5 layers of the world suitable for human habitation. I want to emphasize that when we talk about spatial stratification, we actually mean the stratification of matter and energy. From my point of view, space and time are abstract concepts that do not exist. Space only reflects the existence of matter, while time reflects the movement of matter. When the material world is stratified, space is naturally stratified. Our world seems to have not changed, while the other 5 worlds are brand new. The entire space is a sphere with a radius of about 6,500 kilometers with the Earth as the center, which contains the entire Earth biosphere. If matter outside the area enters this area, it will also be divided into layers. For example, when sunlight shines into this area, it will be divided into 6 layers, and each layer of the world will sense it separately. All material elements within this space are divided into 5 new layers. The new material element layers combine to form another layer of the world in the new space. Those worlds are quite similar to our world. When they were first created, they had everything except life, such as water and air, suitable temperature, and soil, although it was quite poor. But this is enough, because they are planets and are giant systems of the same scale as the Earth. For a planetary system, these conditions are enough to carry the unparalleled miracle in the universe, that is, life. Since they come from the same original material, the positions of these 6 layers of worlds are always roughly overlapping, but the effect is that we seem to have 6 Earths. At that time, the 5-man committee was established to deal with possible abnormal situations. It should be said that in the past 200 years, although this organization has a high status, it has nothing to do. However, Dr. Jean Shi predicted that, according to the view of quantum mechanics, the world essentially exists according to probability, so anything can happen, but the probability is different. Therefore, it is not ruled out that there may be some free matter that can shuttle between different energy levels, such as a proton or a photon, whose probability is less than 1/billionth according to the equation. He thought, what if it's a large object, like a person? Jiang Zhixin's body trembled. For an object the size of a human, the probability of someone who can freely travel through the overlapping space is less than 1 in a trillion. You know, the total population of the 6th world is only 70 billion. So this probability can be considered impossible. But Jiang Zhixin showed a painful look. We won the lottery. In fact, such a person appeared, and there are 2 of them. Of course, I don't think there will be more. One of them is the terrible murderer, and the other is Jiang Zhixin's voice trembled. You? Me? He asked in surprise. Although he had a premonition, he was still greatly touched. Are you saying that I am the kind of person who can freely travel through the overlapping space? Jiang Zhixin nodded solemnly. The chance of you encountering it is less than 1 in a trillion. He added, you can jump to another world with yourself and a small area of space around you. For example, yourself, the clothes on your body, or some small things. If I were that kind of person, why would you spend so much energy to activate the gate of all beings? Through the gate of all living things, you can quickly discover your full potential. The gate of all living things will act as a guide, and before long you will be able to freely travel through the overlapping spaces on your own. At this time, Dr. Catherine waved from a distance. You can start. As she spoke, the floor in the middle of the hall began to separate to both sides, and half a minute later a strangely shaped box rose from below, looking like an elevator. She suddenly showed a strange smile and said to Jiang Zhixin, you are very confident. Why do you think I am willing to do this experiment? Jiang Zhixin was startled. He looked at He as if he was a stranger. What does this mean? Didn't we have an agreement? He still had that strange smile on his face. You might as well recall that I have never said a word of agreement from the beginning to now. I just want to know the truth. It is because of your research that I have been considered a weirdo and a psychopath since I was a child. I lost the life that a normal person should have, and lost everything. When I wanted to figure out why, you even really turned me into an idiot. She's face became distorted and looked a little hideous. I have seen the photos of myself when I was sick. I leaned against the dirty bedside like a piece of dough, with several feet of saliva coming out of my mouth, but my face was smiling with satisfaction. My God, she closed his eyes. What kind of smile is that? Like a well-fed pig. But that's me. It's really me. If it weren't for the fact that you are in trouble now and need my help, I would have spent my whole life like that. This is everything you have done to me, and you all feel at ease. At this time, She's eyes fell on Mu Yejing's face, and there were tears in her eyes. And her. Did you intend to make her an idiot like that? Jiang Zhixin's tone became very low. I can only say sorry. In order to keep the secret, we have no other way. She interrupted him rudely. That's your business. Have I done anything wrong from the beginning to the end? I am completely innocent. If I had to choose now, I would rather be the other person. She looked at Jiang Zhixin teasingly, like a cat looking at a mouse. Don't you think that person is much smarter than me? He didn't foolishly look for answers everywhere like me, nor did he pin his hopes on others. Now he can freely travel between the 6 realms of sentient beings. In each world, he is an unrestrained person, which is actually equivalent to God. She carefully observed Jiang Zhixin's face. The other's expression made him feel happy. He has the supreme power to decide the life and death of sentient beings in the 6 realms. He can dominate the world at will, and all this is caused by you. She laughed. If he is a devil, then you are the ones who created and released the devil. She grinned. There is one more thing. I've thought it through. The bizarre avalanche in the equatorial desert was also caused by you. The ice and snow from another world, yes. You call it free matter, crushed 2 people to death. He smiled cruelly. You were lucky that time. If the avalanche happened in a big city with tens of millions of people, such as New York, she stared into Jiang Zhixin's eyes. Yes, the probability is very small, but don't forget, you didn't take time into account in the probability you mentioned. As time goes by, this chance will increase until it becomes a necessity. It's like the probability of an earthquake happening in a certain place at a certain time is very small, but an earthquake will eventually happen in a few years. Jiang Zhixin's face had turned as pale as paper. Every word she said was like a sharp knife cutting into his heart. Every word she said was the truth. You are an accomplice. There was a voice lingering in his ears. It was you who released the devil. Dr. Jiang Zhixin could no longer stand steadily. He slowly collapsed to the ground, and with his body, his entire world collapsed. Hao Nansuing glared at He's face angrily. His tone was as cold as ice. According to the regulations, I will now take over the position of executive committee member of Dr. Jiang Zhixin. He is my teacher, and if anything happens to him, I will never let you go. I mean what I say. She looked at the gloomy middle-aged man in front of him nonchalantly. I won't cooperate. Maybe you have a prejudice against me. Hao Nansuan said slowly, to be honest, I don't want to defend myself. Who made me the executor back then? If you hate me, you can hate me, but I don't want you to go against your will because of this. Against your will? She repeated this sentence. I don't know what you were talking about. Hao Nansuan smiled as if he knew everything. Why bother pretending? I know your character. You and Dr. Jiang Zhixin are exactly the same kind of people. He paused for a moment. The kind of person who cares more about the world than himself. I know you will agree. It's just a matter of time. She had a dazed expression. Hao Nansuan's words made him feel strange, as if he had been hit in the sore spot. This reversal is just a manifestation of your inner dissatisfaction. You just hate how we treated you back then. Hao Nansuan said leisurely, in fact, you have already compromised. But I think it is more appropriate to say that you compromised with something hidden deep in your heart rather than compromised with us. You know whether I am right or not. She looked at Hao Nansuan with some horror. He felt as if he had been stripped naked in front of this man. Compromise. He thought about the word, and then he found out very reluctantly that what Hao Nansuan said was actually right. This man's eyes could see through his inner world completely. Honestly, I never thought that scientists should take any responsibility for this incident. Hao Nansuan stopped She's rebuttal with his eyes. Listen to me first. I know you want to say that I am excusing myself, but this is what I really think. Human beings lack energy, so we found atomic energy. Human beings lack food, so we found genetically modified crops. Humans lack living space, so we found layered space. We devote ourselves to science to benefit mankind. So how can we ignore the suffering of mankind? Yes, we have also brought nuclear explosions, new mutant terrible species, free matter and free paradise to mankind. But is this what we want? We are like a donkey pulling a mill in a wheat field, turning an endless circle to grind wheat for people. At the same time, because we trampled on the wheat seedlings under our feet, we must stop from time to time and find ways to straighten them. This is our situation. She sighed. Okay, I give up. Let's go out. They may not be able to wait any longer. The box was slowly closing, making a creaking sound. Suddenly, she felt a little flustered. He had a feeling that something was wrong, as if something was making him feel uneasy. Don't be nervous, he comforted himself, saying that this thing had transported tens of billions of people. But the feeling became stronger and stronger, and he felt uncomfortable all over. The creaking sound of the door closing was like a very dull saw sawing a steel bar, giving him goosebumps. Just as the door was about to close, she rushed out. But his coat was hooked and remained inside. Until he looked into Dr. Catherine's eyes that she realized how difficult it was to explain this matter. He smiled awkwardly and said, maybe it's a little hot inside. Hao Nansuan didn't say anything. He looked at He and just shook his head, then waved to others to cancel the action. Don't be in a hurry. He suddenly said, maybe it's because I've never seen this kind of experiment before, so I feel a little uneasy. Anyway, my clothes are left in there, so why not use it to do an experiment first? Hao Nansuan snorted in contempt, not knowing whether it was directed at this idea or He's action just now. Do you know how much energy and money it takes to make a jump? Please don't always use the word experiment. It was okay to say that 200 years ago, but now it is no longer an experiment but a practical one. He turned to the other people and said, turn off the power. She stopped him relentlessly. I am just an ordinary person. I dare not believe in things I have never seen. I have some confidence. I think we should just follow his lead. Lan Jiangshui said unhappily, otherwise he won't cooperate. The box closed again, and the indicator light on the console began to flash rapidly. After an unknown amount of time, the door of the box slowly opened, and she was the first to rush in. Catherine's calm voice came from behind. There will be nothing in it, and your clothes are no longer in this world. But she turned around, holding something in his hand, his coat, but it was already full of holes. It seems she smiled strangely. The experiment was partially successful. My God, someone destroyed the gate of all beings, Dr. Catherine exclaimed in a low voice. Hao Nansuan looked around vigilantly, and his eyes stopped at the left corner of the hall, where some large instruments were piled. Suddenly, a noise came from there, and Hao Nansuan immediately rushed over, followed by Lan Jiangshui. 2 gunshots were heard. People finally realized what was happening and rushed over there in a mess. But a strange sight appeared. A shadow was walking towards the ceiling of the hall, lifting its feet up and down as if it was walking up the stairs. By the time the guards remembered and started shooting at the shadow had become increasingly faint, and then it disappeared into a corner of the ceiling. The crowd stood there in shock, the sound of gunfire still echoing. After a long while, she suddenly thought of Haonan village. He hurried forward. Hao Nansuan fell behind an instrument, with a bullet wound in his shoulder, and was already unconscious. Lan Jiangshui fell a few meters away, with a bullet piercing his head. The sun rises from the east in the early morning, generously pouring its radiant light onto the earth. The clouds are dyed a fiery red by the sunlight, creating endless changes. He was walking on an abandoned road. He could vaguely see some tall buildings right in front of him, which encouraged him. At this time, a road sign next to him attracted Hishi's attention. He stopped to look at the rotten sign and lit a cigarette. Hishi waited until the cigarette burned out and a strong burning sensation appeared between his 2 fingers before he threw it away as if waking up from a dream. He put his hands back into his trouser pockets and walked forward. Hishi's figure gradually walked away, leaving only a rotten road sign trembling in the wind. At this time, a gust of wind blew the road sign in a different direction, and the sun shone on it, revealing a line of unclear handwriting. For kilometers, Maple Leaf City. The experimental subject did not return on schedule. Dr. Catherine stared at the gate of all beings. The time showed that Hishi was nearly 6 hours past the time he should have returned. Muyi sat quietly on the chair beside him, biting her lower lip and saying nothing, but everyone could see the anxiety in her eyes. She wanted to know if Hishi would be in trouble, but she didn't know who to ask. Dr. Jiang Zhixin sat in a wheelchair. He looked much older in just a few days. The argument with Hishi that day triggered his heart attack. If it weren't for the shortage of staff and Dr. Hao Nansuan's treatment, he would not have come. Have you focused on the area where Maple Leaf City is located? Dr. Jiang Zhixin asked softly. I think Hishi is trustworthy. His late return must be because he went to that city. If it were me, I would do the same. But Hishi suddenly appeared in the gate of all beings. I'm back. He looked meaningfully at Jiang Zhixin in the wheelchair, and it was obvious that he heard their conversation. Dr. Jiang Zhixin looked Hishi in the face and said, How do you feel? If there is no mortal gate now, can you travel through the overlapping space? Hishi hesitated for a moment and said, Not so fast. I think it will take at least 2 or 3 experiments. Jiang Zhixin actually laughed. Don't try to deceive me. I believe in theory, and it's enough to get experience through the gate of all beings once. Hishi nodded awkwardly. It seems I can't hide it from you. I just don't want to see you guys happy. Jiang Zhixin sighed. If I were you, I wouldn't want to see us happy either. I even hoped that these people would get bloodied and cry all day long. Hishi also sighed and said, You are much smarter than I thought. Jiang Zhixin smiled, which made the wrinkles on his face more crisscrossed. This is not a matter of intelligence, but a question of being humane. I can naturally guess what you are thinking when I stand in your shoes. Hishi was stunned for a moment, and after a while he said quietly, It seems that you are really a good person. He looked around and said, There is something I want to discuss with you alone. I actually went to 2 levels this time. Why? Because I saw something very unusual in Maple Blade City. You know Freehaven. It's still an illegal organization that's not officially recognized here, but in the world of Maple Blade City it's already legal. Jiang Zhixin's face darkened. He stared at the corner without saying a word. Hishi continued, Nearly 30% of the people in that world have become members, and the number is still growing rapidly. I have talked to some of them, and they said that the Holy Lord was ordered to save the world, and he has boundless power and can control the life and death of all living beings. Some of them have even witnessed the appearance of the Holy Lord. Hishi sighed. You don't know how pious they are. I think even if the Holy Lord wants them to die immediately, they will definitely not hesitate at all, because they believe that the Holy Lord will give them eternal life. It is only a matter of time before free heaven dominates that world. Didn't you say you had been to another world? Jiang Zhixin interrupted. Hishi smiled with difficulty. the situation is even worse. The influence of free heaven in that world is even greater. Almost everyone is in a frenzy. The one standing on the altar of the church to be worshipped is no longer God, but a shadowy statue. They say it is the Holy Lord. I don't think those people are stupid, because what they witnessed is indeed something beyond imagination, and they can't help but fall into a frenzy. Anything else? Did you gain anything else this time? He-Shi's body trembled. Jiang Zhixin's inquiry touched him. This time he violated the plan and went to Maple Leaf Knife City, secretly just to obey a voice in his heart. When He-Shi faced the magnificent city scenery of Maple Leaf Knife City, when he saw the huge glass curtain wall reflecting the endless sunlight, when his hands really ran across the rough surface of the building, when his eyes were burned by the hustle and bustle of the world, he clearly heard a voice in his heart saying loudly, "I saw Maple Leaf Knife City. I saw Maple Leaf Knife City with my own eyes. I am not crazy." His mind flew back to the old building at number 10 Tanmu Street. His mother's sigh echoed in his ears, and the sky full of yellow leaves and the back of the big-eyed girl leaving in the yellow leaves passed before his eyes. 2 lines of hot tears slid down He-Shi's face, dripping on the foreign land and making a clear sound. "What's wrong with you?" Jiang Zhixin's concerned question woke He-Shi up. He-Shi waved his hands and said, "Nothing. I just remembered something." He took a sip of water and calmed down. "Did you find that something is wrong? I mean, the last time the Xinxingmen was destroyed." "I know. It seems that Free Haven is indeed a powerful organization. I think that Shadow, that's what they told me, is the person we are looking for. The question is, how did he get in? I am actually surprised by your question. For someone who can travel through the overlapping spaces, the whole world is transparent. He can travel freely and unhindered. The question is, how did he know that we were going to conduct a jump experiment that day? He can't possibly get into someone else's head. Just tell me who you suspect." He-Shi hesitated for a moment. "Why didn't Dr. Cui Ziyuan come on the day of the jump experiment?" Jiang Zhi was shocked. "You suspect him?" After seeing off the guests, Cui Ziyuan walked into the study alone. He looked very tired. He felt that he had lost a lot of energy since his 70th birthday 3 years ago. He did not notice that someone had been standing behind him for a long time. "Heko," He-Shi greeted generously. "What are you doing here? I want to make one thing clear. Now I suspect there are people from Free Haven in the 5-member committee. So you doubt me?" Cui Ziyuan looked around. "There's no one else here. Just tell me straight. I just think this hypothesis can explain some things." Dr. Cui Ziyuan sighed. "Is it because I was not present on the day of the experiment that you made this inference?" He pointed to a thick stack of documents on the table and said, 2 months ago, I formally proposed to withdraw from the 5-member committee due to health reasons. You know that we have always been a lifetime system, so this change should be considered a big one. I have been busy with this matter during this period. I don't want to arouse your suspicion. Dr. Jiang Zhixin knows about this. Didn't he tell you? Dr. Jiang Zhixin? He didn't say that. He-Shi recalled in distress. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind, and for a moment he almost couldn't stand. He-Shi drove the car all the way, and the scenery outside the window flew away. After walking 2 blocks, the road was suddenly blocked, and some parade teams holding banners passed by one after another. All the banners were filled with the words Freedom Paradise, and under the banners were countless people with fanatical expressions. They shouted slogans and passed by noisily, and more passers-by joined them. He-Shi knew that Freedom Paradise's activities had become increasingly public in recent times, and there were many people in the government who supported it. It was only a matter of time before this increasingly large organization gained legal status. The parade finally passed, and He-Shi stepped on the accelerator impatiently. Now everything is clear. There is a possibility that someone from Free Heaven is on the 5-member committee. Because there is no all living beings gate in the other 5 newly created spaces, and no one can reach the realm of freely traveling through the stacked spaces without the all living beings gate as a guide. So this person must come from this world. More importantly, if there is such a person, he must have witnessed some strange phenomena since childhood like He-Shi. From a human perspective, he will definitely ask questions and want to find answers. But he did not do so, but took a completely different way to use this ability. This means that he is likely to be a person who knows the inside story and is likely to know He-Shi's tragic experience. Who else can meet these conditions besides the 5-member committee? Among the 5 people, Lan Jiangshui is no longer a doubt, and He would never think of Jiang Zhixin. Catherine has never left He's sight when the experiment went wrong. Now if Cui Ziyuan is not suspected, then there is only one person left. He was the first one to run to the left corner of the hall in the laboratory that day. There was no evidence of what he and Lan Jiangshui saw. If he hadn't done that day, people would easily think that the destruction of the Mortal Gate was caused by internal problems. He could divert people's attention by doing that. He could kill Lan Jiangshui first, and then deliberately show a shadow of his body to attract people's attention. When the shadow disappeared, he could return to the original place from another layer of space and shoot himself again. At that time, the security guards were shooting outside, and the gunshots were impossible to distinguish. Dr. Jiang Zhixin panted slightly, and he felt his heart tighten. Ever since He talked to him about his suspicions about the 5-member committee, he knew what had happened, and he almost intuitively thought of Hao Nansuan. But how could he face this? Hao Nansuan was his most proud and beloved student. So you admit it? Jiang Zhixin asked in a low voice, the muscles on his face trembling uncontrollably. Hao Nansuan looked at his feet expressionlessly. Jiang Zhixin's question made him upset. He thought carefully about what went wrong. He was not afraid that Jiang Zhixin would discover this secret. In fact, it was only a matter of time. In his plan, he would show up sooner or later because he would dominate all sentient beings in the 6 realms. The problem was that he did not want to confront Jiang Zhixin so soon. After all, he was his teacher and his kindness was as great as a mountain. You won't understand. A person is forced to witness countless strange shadows from an unknown source since childhood. They dance in front of your eyes all the time. I dare not tell anyone what I saw with my own eyes. I am afraid that they will put me in a mental hospital. I am very scared. Hao Nansuan covered his head, his eyes full of pain. You won't understand. Jiang Zhixin's expression calmed down a little. He stroked Hao Nansuan's shoulder gently. I know you have suffered a lot. We are all responsible for the whole thing. As long as you disband Free Paradise and give up those absurd practices, your future will be limitless. Future. Hao Nansuan seemed to be touched. He stared at the wall with a dazed look. How could he explain it clearly to Jiang Zhixin? Did Jiang Zhixin know what it felt like to stand on the altar and enjoy the worship of hundreds of millions of people? Did he know how it felt to have the dust under his feet kissed? But he knew that the feeling was truly unforgettable. Nowadays, shrines of Freedom Paradise have been built everywhere in the world of the 6 realms of sentient beings. When he descended on them, enthusiastic cheers resounded through the sky. His smile, frown, joy, and anger could influence hundreds of millions of people. They were willing to live and die for him. Countless people were willing to give him money, and countless girls were willing to give him their chastity. In the world of Freedom Paradise, his words were holy scriptures and golden rules. At that moment, he was the center of the world and the master of hundreds of millions of people, and now Jiang Zhixin actually wanted him to give up all this. Jiang Zhixin looked a little dazed. These past few days I've been thinking, maybe we and Dr. She were both wrong. We are really too accommodating to the will of humans, always trying to satisfy them. 6 realms of sentient beings, Jiang Zhixin sighed. Buddha originally only prepared the world of humanity for humans. All we have done with all our heart and soul is simply going against the will of heaven, and it can only be a poison to quench thirst. She is right. As time goes by, the overall possibility of the emergence of free matter will become greater and greater. If that avalanche or a volcanic eruption occurs in a big city, the consequences will be unimaginable. Jiang Zhixin closed his eyes, showing a painful expression. If so, our souls will fall into the bottom of heck forever. So, I decided one thing. What's the matter? Hao Nansuan asked nervously. I have decided that our committee will terminate the Gate of All Beings project. Jiang Zhixin opened his eyes. I have talked to Dr. Catherine and Dr. Cui Ziyuan, and they have agreed. Jiang Zhixin stared at Hao Nansuan. Now, all we need is your vote. What if I don't agree? Hao Nansuan said quietly. Jiang Zhixin showed a resolute look on his face, and a trace of pain floated in his old eyes. Then we can only break off all ties. He picked up the phone on the table. but Jiang Zhixin immediately covered his chest. A strange-looking knife pierced through his right chest. He looked at the blood dripping down, and the expression on his face was as if he was facing something unimaginable. No, He suddenly appeared from the corner and just witnessed the scene of the master's murder. Hao Nansuan's face turned pale, and he retreated in horror. He looked at Jiang Zhixin's injuries and glared at Hao Nansuan angrily. "Are you still a human being?" he asked angrily. "He is your teacher." Hao Nansuan calmed down a little. He shouted nervously, "He wants to stop me. Whoever wants to stop me will die. I am God. The supreme God, you are a devil." She interrupted him angrily, and at the same time, a gun appeared in his hand. "You should go to heck." Hao Nansuan suddenly laughed. He stared at the gun in Heishi's hand nonchalantly. "You should know that this is useless. Both of us were chosen by God by chance. Nothing in the world can hurt us. By the time your bullet hits me, I will have already gone to another dimension. I believe in retribution." "Retribution," Heishi shouted devoutly, as if he wanted the power of heaven to help him get rid of this demon. Almost at the same time, the gun in his hand spewed out long tongues of fire, and deafening gunshots filled the entire secret room. The smoke cleared, and the opposite wall was covered with bullet holes, but Haonan village was gone. There was no retribution, no power from heaven, nothing. Heishi threw away his gun, knelt on the ground in despair, and cried with his face covered. "Who are you?" It was Jiang Zhixin's voice. He woke up and looked at Heishi in confusion. Heishi rushed forward. "It's me, Heishi." He held Jiang Zhixin's hand, feeling the life slowly disappearing from the old man. "What should I do?" Heishi groaned in pain. "He is a demon beyond the 6 realms of sentient beings. No power can do anything to him. Tell me, what should I do? Is there anything else that can stop him? What else? Tell me." Almost enlightenment spread across Jiang Zhixin's old face. He lowered his eyes and said word by word, "Heaven's net is vast, but nothing can escape it." He lowered his head suddenly. She knelt there motionless, his heart numb without any feeling. No one came in. The secret room was isolated from everything that had just happened. After an unknown amount of time, a quick phone ring suddenly rang, and Heishi picked up the receiver. "Dr. Jiang Zhixin." An anxious voice came from the receiver. "Dr. Catherine and Dr. Cui Ziyuan were assassinated in the laboratory a few minutes ago. According to Dr. Hao Nansuan's analysis, this was most likely done by a terrorist named Heishi, and the government has issued a wanted order." Heishi couldn't help but laugh. This was too absurd. He actually became a wanted criminal, while the real devil was still standing tall like a gentleman. He laughed and said into the receiver, "I am Heishi. Dr. Jiang Zhixin is right next to me. He is dead. Come and catch me." Ha ha ha. Heishi threw away the receiver and continued to laugh. The door of the secret room opened, and the guards with guns and live ammunition rushed in. But Heishi's body gradually faded and disappeared, and only the shrill and desperate laughter was still echoing everywhere.